Hi, my name is Ken Lasseson. I wrote the Microbiome prescription website, and today I'm going to be looking at a new sample that came in who the reader requested me to take a look at it. First of all, he gave an excellent long backstory for his state and his condition, and the backstory is in itself interesting. Basically, the problem was he had no health issues, went on a ketogenic diet, and has been suffering health issues since then. Okay, so his explanation for why it was a problem was he ascribed it to DNA. However, in digging into the literature on it, it may also affect people, not necessarily with this DNA. It sort of, there's some interesting cautions about it in the literature. So basically, he ended up going chronic fatigue syndrome like, and over 8 years, he's still trying to get back. And that is from switching to a diet, just sort of a nightmare scenario. So the description is there, and the key thing is most of the symptoms he has now are also those which are associated with chronic fatigue syndrome. And not too long after changing the diet, he slipped into chronic fatigue syndrome-like behavior. So basically, it sort of suggests that the ketogenic diet for some people could push them into a chronic fatigue state. Flip side is that chronic fatigue state, being a microbiome dysfunction, is possible. Okay, so I went over and looked at the ketogenic literature, and usually, even for my own personal thing, when the doctor prescribes something, I always do due diligence. That means I go to PubMed and I start searching for appropriate literature. The thing is that I found a fair amount of literature raising issues with this type of diet in the last year and a half, 2 years. He did this 8 years ago. This literature wasn't available. So he may have done due diligence. Today we have better due diligence. Basically, there was a nice study 2021, and the bottom line was very simple. Using a modified Atkins diet, 25% of people had unfavorable effect as a result of it. However, when you went to do classic ketogenic diet, 53% had undesirable complications. In other words, that's the type of odds I really have trouble advocating this type of diet for anybody when you're looking at that odds, unless you know why the odds happen, or if it has type of diet which for a very specific medical condition has been proven beyond reasonable doubt to be beneficial for a specific medical condition. For example, epilepsy, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease are the dominant one. Other health, as a general cure-all for health problems, no. I have a real trouble accepting that as a cure-all. We have another interesting one, which is a keto flu associated with the diet. To me, that brings back memories of chronic fatigue syndrome being referred to as yuppie flu. Flu-type symptoms as a result of ketogenic diet, which is basically in some ways exactly what this person experienced. And one of his reasons was the naive belief that it would improve his athletic performance. And what we actually find is that in studies where it was being measured, it didn't improve, it deteriorated athletic performance. So a belief, a selling point which the evangelists try convincing people that it's the right way to go, actually gets blown out of the water. We also have cognitive impairment induced by the diet. And we also have dysfunction of regulatory cells. So there are a bunch of recent discoveries that this type of diet has adverse effects. Okay, so now that I have suggested you do careful due diligence for this diet or any type of generic cure-all diet, you need to do due diligence. My own personal attitude is you don't want to do a pro forma diet. You want to modify your diet specifically to change your unique microbiome. and which is why I ended up creating that site so that people would get evidence based on the U.S. National Library of Medicine studies, suggestions which are specific for their individual microbiome, not a general cure-all package for people to sell and do it. People like cure-all packages. They are simple. You often have a community associated with them. So it's a natural thing to want to do. Unfortunately, it can have significant risks and downsides, which often the people who are advocating will never hear or pay attention to. They basically hear nothing, see nothing, but they speak tons about how good the product is. Okay, let's go on to what we're going to do. First thing recently I did a post calling Predicting Symptoms Performance Reviews. And I figured, okay, let's go and see. New sample came in, and let's see what happens. When I did the review, we found at least 50% of symptoms were correctly predicted by using either the cake products or the bacteria. And so my first question is, okay, with this person, do we have the same occurrence? Do we have a high predictability of symptoms? And so I shipped over to him the top 20 symptoms for both products and bacteria. He marked which one he had and came back. And for the cake products, we ended up with a 30% hit rate. But when we went down to the bacteria, we ended up using a little bit of magical computational elegance. We ended up with a 60% hit rate. In other words, most of the symptoms being predicted were there. 60% I view as being a good hit rate because a lot of the symptoms are things which are specific, like a particular type of virus, and a lot of things you have different conditions which could mimic each other to a certain degree, but may be distinctive and separated, so you end up getting this sort of grayscale, 50 shades of bacterial associations, if you wish. Okay, now, what my approach is, and which in some ways the main reason for this, is to do a free analysis. And when you read analysis, you're probably going to say, okay, that's nice, but he really has lost me on how to do it, because it's just, wait a minute, you do that, how in the world do you do it? So the best way is to walk through it. So I'm going to walk through free analysis, show you some features. You can use this as a step-by-step guide for yourself in doing things. And again, my preference is for you to do the work yourself. Do not do consultations. I'm not licensed to give personal advice. That would be giving the appearance of practicing medicine. I'm a data nerd. I'm a data scientist. Also a pretty good programmer. So my goal is to build the tools which ideally your medical professional will be able to use to help, or yourself can use. But if you do use it, make sure you take suggestions to your medical professional for review before you start it. Standard warnings, because I'm giving you suggestions based on probability and mathematics. Lacks any knowledge about your clinical conditions, your allergies, compounding conditions. This is strictly from the microbiome, nothing more. And some suggestions could be counterproductive. Some suggestions could be something that will drive your blood pressure high, and you're already dealing with high blood pressure. Or some of the suggestions could drive your cholesterol levels sky high, and you may already be dealing, or alternatively, you may be dealing with POTS, and some of the suggestions could drop the POTS. We're dealing only with the bacteria, not the whole person. Your professional MD is the one who you need to go to review the suggestions before you start. Okay, let's go on. So my approach is very simple. I'm making use of the lovely consensus report, and I'm going to do it 3 times. So the first consensus report is going to be based on 2 of the symptom matches he had, and the 2 I'm picking are the ones where we have a pretty big cohort of people with that, feeding into our artificial intelligence engine, so we get probably very good matching, very strong relationships coming out. And then going over to PubMed and using their literature and saying, okay, what bacteria have they identified as being significant, and working from there. So that's the first pass. So we could go run 5 different regressions, get a consensus report. And you will see how you can download this consensus report as a CSV file, which you can now load into Excel or Google Spreadsheet elsewhere. So you can do it, have it there, save it on your desktop or your PC, and come back to it later. And if you want to, you can take all 3 suggestions, put them up in Excel in the 3 separate spreadsheets, and do cross-referencing or whatever else you want to do it. Some people are nerdy out there, and I'm just going to do it. The second approach is I'm going to do a absolutely naive consensus report. And that means we ignore symptoms, we ignore medical conditions, and all we are doing is to look for counter-multiple outliers. And we're going to go with the canned medical advice from Jason Hollerock, who is a naturopath in Tasmania who is well respected in the microbiome community. So we're going to go with the pro forma there. So what we're doing is we're going to see what are suggestions using absolutely no information, either symptoms or medical diagnosis at all. The third pass is we are going to go through the predictive matches which is all from AI learning on our sample base of 2,000 plus samples and associations we have derived. And we are going to just use those and put all those through. Ends up being actually 12 different sets of suggestions and do a consensus with them. So we're going to end up with 3 reports. We're going to actually run 5, 7, 9, almost 20 separate sets of suggestions and then put them all together. 20 sets of suggestions. If you do one and read or do one and read, you get overwhelmed. There's a lot of information to be processed. So let's go over and get going. Okay, we have exactly 1 sample, which makes it nice for it. And the first criteria, which we are going to do, are using the symptoms. And we're just going to go up here, symptom versus bacteria summary. We're not necessarily picking his strongest mixture. What we are going to do is we are going to go over and pick one which we have more samples, which he does have. So we go over there, and what we have is we have all the selection of every strong association. We have a very good hunk of associations, not as many strong as we like, but for our first pass, let's do that. So we click that, goes over to the standard suggestion screens. We just go to run it, everything pro forma, making no changes. Potentially you may want to add something like that in, but at the moment we're just going to, for illustration, go straight through. We have the first suggestion. That was it. Let's go back, and again let's take a look at this one, and the next one is focus vision. Unable to focus vision and attention. Again, we have a good number of samples. We have 240 in the cohort, so it's a good sample in terms of statistics to work from. We have there, and we have similar as before. We don't have an extremely strong match, but we have a decent match. And we go through here, do it, and we have a second. Now if we go back to 16 samples, I made a quick mistake. I have to clear and repeat, so one moment. Okay, things are fixed. We now have the 2 consensus suggestions there, and we actually will find what we have is we have a new option called this consensus suggestions, which basically says how long ago you did it. Remember, these suggestions are kept only in memory for 24 hours. How many suggestions grand total for each one. So we have a fair number. We have a pretty rich collection of items there. Okay, now let's go back to our sample. And the next thing we are going to do is we're going to go over to National Library of Medicine. And we're going to again use here, up here, that's it, medical conditions here. And we're going to go down and we're looking for irritable bowel. Okay, irritable bowel syndrome. And what we do is we click on this little one, which says compare to your own bacteria. Automatically selects it because you only had one. If not, you go and pick it. And now we have things there. So we have all the lists and where the matches are. Now we also have the count off multiple thing. And what you will find is that your count is 450. It is within the count of multiple range, which are very conservative. But because the study report that on average it's higher, then what we have is we have the count is significantly above the average count or the medium count, which is what the study would have used. That is deemed to be a match, so we do it in fact at a 78th percentile, so it's a good distance above the medium, so it indicates that it is a likely match. So what we do is we're going to click here once, twice. Now get all the items there, and now we just go over here and do a nice easy check on every item that has a little explosion on it. That's all we do. And here we don't get suggestions directly. We could go and do it and click, go back and forth. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify matters and simply add it to handpicked bacteria, which now shows up there. And I'm going to go back and take a look at the medical conditions for the next one, which is ME/CFS with IBS, which is okay, with IBS here again. The magic one automatically takes whatever samples you're currently on and applies it there, so you don't have to jump around. So we have the same thing as before. Again, we only have one choice there, so it just makes it nice and easy. If you have multiple choices, double check always so you have the right sample. We do the same trick as we did before. We double click and we only have 3. And actually, here's the interesting thing. I think I saw all 3 of them on the prior one. So the same dominant ones here. And so now we have 2 things, and we got the last one, which is, although he doesn't have a diagnosis of obsessive compulsive disorder, he himself recognized himself as having a bunch of that type of symptoms. So we're going to go through and see what that comes up with. And okay, right there again, just magic button here. We do a click here and click here, and this time we have a much longer list than the other 2. So and some of them are uncommon, like bifidobacteria, I notice are uncommon, but other things are there. So we go through and we just go and mark all of them. I'm intentionally not doing a dialogue about what a bacteria is or doesn't do, etc. It will make the talk long, and there's a lot of, I'm trying to give a simple step by step, just follow the same steps, and you can do it yourself. Okay, and now we select that to hand bacteria. Here we have the handless bacteria. We can view what we have picked, and there is 14 bacteria which are associated, and we are ready to get our suggestions. So we go over to handpicked bacteria again, suggestions. We have a slightly different screen because we are handpicking them, but that's fine. And we are going to leave it there. In some cases, you may want to toss in antibiotics and antivirals. Again, depends on whether or not you're a professional with prescribing rights or not. But let's just go over and click here. And voila, we have our suggestions here. And we now have done all 5 items which were described into our first pass. So let's go over to 16S. And we did not have something take. Okay, let me go and repeat that. Okay, we now have our consensus suggestions done, and there are 3 reports there. We again can list the consensus and can see how long ago it was. One which just finished a minute ago, and we can see how many are in each one. So now we can go over and take a look at the consensus report. So view consensus. And there is a consensus report with all the stuff. We have 65 items there. We can again sort by there. We can see a couple of things like Japanese apricot is right up the top. Maybe a bit of a challenge to get hold of. H1, which is a Indian food spice, and you can buy that in probably most Indian shops quite easily. Stevia, which there's a variety of opinions about stevia. Sumac, which is again available. Pulse, pea fiber, etc. Magnesium municipal as a probiotic, etc. The interesting thing is we can go down to safer things and even further down. And in the post associated with this, I go into greater discussion. My purpose is not to discuss this post, but show how you get the data. But now we have a little bit of magic here. There's a download button which I added as a result of doing this whole process. So the download basically goes and does it, and I'll put a after it. And there we go. And now if finish downloading, I can say open it, and it will open up in Excel, and there we have it. And we have all the data, excuse the thing, so you can go and sort across everything to your heart's content. And I'll also have the link to the page providing information about each modifier, so you can go through, sort it however you want. And as you see, the grand total is 471 different items in there. If you go back to the lab samples, there we had 471 in the consensus report, and what we find is 471. It means that a lot of these items are on multiple reports at the same time, because we have 471. So compared to the last one, the other 2 reports only contributed some 39 additional ones, and everything else was a repeat of items from the other one. So it means we are not exponentially increasing. We are increasing the numbers moderately by the number of times you go through. Okay, let's go back to our 16 samples. And we are going to do a little bit of house cleaning. First, I'm going to just get rid of the hand-picked one, take that off the screen. And now I'm going to clear the consensus, which also causes it to disappear. So we have done the first set. Set number 2 is the completely naive obtaining of suggestions. We don't use any information about symptoms, no information about diagnosis. All we use is the microbiome set naively. Generally, the the results are not expected to be as good because you don't have ability to really focus in to what's causing your symptoms or your diagnosis. But let's do it anyways. So first one is we're going to use Jason's here. Oops. Okay, let's go back. And let's go and try the Caltech Maltrap. Okay, and give me a second. I got some quick preparing to do. So I went over onto my test bed and ran it, and things seem to be working there. I'm going to refresh the site. Could be an intermittent data problem or database connection issue, which sometimes happens. Be patient, and if it doesn't resolve in reasonable time, email me. Because sometimes bugs get out. I try catching most of the bugs proactively and get email whenever somebody has it. So most of the time you don't need to contact me. But if the problem isn't resolved in a reasonable time, 24-hour max, email me and I will investigate it. So here we have the list of things here. So we have just done Jason's. And now we go back and we do the Caltech Maltrap, fingers crossed, works again, and we have a small number here. And if you take a look here, you see that we only have 4 items picked, which is why we end up getting a small list. If you, when you read the full description, this person gets worse whenever they take an lactobacillus, and we have here, we have a whole bunch of lactobacillus on the avoid list. We haven't seen any lactobacillus on any of the to take list, and again we see Japanese apricot showing up again, which is an interesting one. Mastic gum also shows up. So we have that, and now we go back to our 16S, and now we'll see we have 2 consensus suggestions, and that's it. That's all we were asking for. We can see when the suggestions were done. One was 2 minutes ago, one was 1 minute ago, and we can see we have a grand total of 300 odd things. So we can again go back, consensus suggestion, and we can view the consensus, and there we have the consensus, and we can again sort there. There, and again we can adjust the level. For example, if we go down to a 1, we now get there, and then there we have, like, this is the one that came out very strongly before, and the reason it came out strongly is it has a very significant positive impact, but we have 1 case to avoid it and 1 case to take it, but the expected negative impact was very small, which is why it probably showed up on a summary list, which does a whole bunch of juggling behind the scenes to give you better. These are the raw numbers, which gives you better control. And again, we can do a magical download, and we'll name this B. And we can come back to it later. So we have done 2 of the 3 methods, and now we need to go back. We're going to clear the consensus here, and we go on. The last one, collection, is actually a very straightforward one. We go to symptoms, and we go down to probable symptoms from bacteria, which is here, and we are going to go and expand it out to alternative. If you look at the blog post, you will see which ones he identified as having. It's interesting in that some of the neurological ones he doesn't have at all, and so those are sort of very common skips, and then other things are. Now here, let's walk through and see how we can do this smartly. so you do not get exhausted with going back and forth. So we have, okay, 1 second, let me just find. Actually, to my amusement, I can look at the numbers in the post and the numbers on screen and say, wait a minute, they don't agree. And then I remember that every day we recalculate in afternoon Seattle time, we recalculate the associations and the relationships. So the numbers will change from one day to the next slightly, not greatly, but it will change slightly. So we'll go down, and the first one is he's an Northern European. Whether or not one includes or doesn't include that, it's a bit of a toss-it. I'm just going to open into a new window, which is here. We have, as before, we have 74 strong, 90 of the 97. So he has a Northern European microbiome. Key point to remember about ethnicity of microbiome results. Without, if you can, when we get sufficient data to control for ethnicity, then it will get there. And again, we'll go here, create a sample, go through suggestions, and get the suggestions. Okay, and now we go back and work sitting. That's not so much a condition, but it is a fact that somebody who sits a lot of work has certain type of bacteria shifts, and we'll attempt to correct for those too. Same thing here. Click all the way through. We don't have need to wait for it and inspect it. We just can go in. Needing to take a nap during the day is level 1 of his check marks. Go through here, here. We go back. The next one is poor gut motility, which is right here. Again, we go through suggestions. We go back. Next one is an interesting one. You can read my notes about it. One thing you need to remember is that viruses are not eliminated. They go dormant. They are controlled. But because the virus is still there, it may still be altering your microbiome in certain ways from the residual virus, which is still. So like in this case, the just one is known to cause chickenpox in kids, but also shingles in adults who had chickenpox like kids. So in other words, we know that this particular virus persists for 60 or 70 or 80 years in the body, and there's no reason to believe it has no impact on the microbiome. Just in case it does, you may want to go and read the notes there. And, okay. And I had already clicked it once, so I'm going to go back so I don't double click. Go here. And go back. Sugars make sleep or cognitive issues. Go over. And again, just click through. Nice and simple. Just click, click, click. You can read all the information if you want, but we do it. Now we have long-term chronic stress. And next one we have ringing in the ears. Next is abnormal sensitivity to light. I'm going to go back. Now, as you may have noticed, this is predicted from his bacterial relationship. And we are clicking almost on most of them. In fact, almost most of those at the top. There's one or two which we don't click, which indicated less impairment of cognitive features, but almost everything else ends up doing it. We don't have allergies as a characteristic, which again, other factors will come into allergies. We have cold limbs, we have another one, another positive match. Again, go few. There, so suggestions. We have the next one is down here. Notice we are getting into lower numbers and the frequency of match is going down. As in, we have one, then we have two or three skip. At the beginning, we were doing bang, 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 match, 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 match. The score on the left, the so-called Z-score, indicated the probability. So we are much less probability of matches now, and we don't match as many. Okay, so we'll go over and again right-click, and we can double, get rid of the duplicate. We click here. And we go back to the last one, which is here. And click. And here. So we have gone through 12 different sets of suggestions. And we don't need to read them because we have built-in consensus reports. So 16S, and we'll see we have a consensus report which are 12. We can go in and take a look at when suggestions are, how many are in each. One, we only got 17 hits. Others, we get 300, 400. Generally 300 items in the full list of suggestions. Some pro or con, suggestions to stop, suggestions to take. So let's see what the net result is when we go back. And we'll go and we'll view the consensus. So here we have the consensus. Again, we can do the sorting by it. We have closed, sumac again, which we mentioned earlier. Here we have Symbiophore 2 E. coli probiotics showing up there. Remember, he had adverse effects from lactobacillus. Generally, E. coli and lactobacillus don't get around well. The fact that E. coli is being suggested would somewhat reflect the lactobacillus issue. We have here another interesting magnesium deficient diet, which is sort of an odd suggestion. What it means is check the food for food to help with high magnesium. Also make sure your supplements aren't high in magnesium. If they are, you may want to reduce them, unless of course you are low in magnesium by blood tests, etc., in which case see your MD to consult on what you should do. But in general, if there's not a problem with low magnesium levels in your conventional lab tests, then look, trying to reduce the amount of magnesium going into you from either supplements or diet. And in the post, I do give a link which lists how much magnesium are in a variety of foods. So we have there, again, we have our magic downloads. And we have C. So I'm going to just open this one up. Mainly I'm curious to see how many are in there, and we go down. Just 474. Remember we had 300, 300, 300, 300, 300 there, but the consensus ends up being about the same size as our original A1, which was 471, 474. So we have all the details there. And as a quick reminder, as people, the take and avoid numbers are coming from how many bacteria this particular item shifts positively, shifts negatively, how many studies report that it's positive or negative. Some items, I was looking at one today, you had 5 studies saying it shifts lactobacillus upwards and 2 saying it shifts lactobacillus downwards. So we do some mathematical calculations in the background and try getting a net estimate for how much impact we can rely on, and then how much are we trying to shift lactobacillus by, etc. So all those factors ends up being taken into your count of to avoid or take. The count here is a count of the number of times which this particular item shows up on the list as a avoid or take. Like for example, this one, okay, icon shows up on 5 of the 12 sets of suggestions was a avoid, and the other 7 shows nothing, which means it's probably an avoid. Again, you can go in and start here. Is another case. We have apple shows up 9 times as to an avoid, 2 times as a take. So just about every single set of suggestion has an opinion. Working from the consensus, you can be extra confident. You have high degree of confidence that the suggestions will be beneficial to you, because again, we're dealing with fuzzy data. Wish we had better data, but we don't, and we are working with the best information which we are able to obtain from the U.S. National Library of Medicine, the Microbiome, and our own proprietary statistical analysis and machine learning, artificial intelligence routine, which we've built up over the last 3 years, and which we've been quite pleased. We've tried some of the canned machine learning things such as random forest or decision trees, and we find that those actually perform quite poorly compared to what we are doing, and we've done some side-by-side comparisons. And what we're using for AI, which is all very much custom built from experiencing and modeling of how we think the microbiome behaves, has been quite pleasing. It has met my expectations and exceeded it. My hopes, to say, and exceeded them. Okay, that's it. See the blog for the rest of the information. This was basically a how do you do this type of analysis for yourself. And we've done 3 sets of consensus reports, 400 odd items each one. All of them are downloaded as Excel spreadsheets, so you can load them all in, cross-reference them, sort them, do whatever you want. So you can build a 4th consensus document, taking all of them together. Generally, because of the difference of approaches, I prefer to have it in parts, but that's my individual preference. I better shut up. I want to get this uploaded. I want to get off to bed. Ciao.